Welcome to I Might Believe in Fairies. I am your host, Aaron Erber. This is a podcast about stories, myths, and the Catholic faith. Welcome to I Might Believe in Fairies. This is episode 2, and today I'm going to have a friendly conversation with Katarinya Mariya. We met on Twitter, and she is an expert on fairies. So we're going to talk about fairies today. And we're just going to keep it nice and loose and just have a friendly conversation. So, Katarinya, why don't you tell us how you got interested in fairies and what fairies are?
Well, in order to be completely, if we're going back to how I initially encountered fairies, I did the same way that all children do in fairy stories.
All right, that's the end. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
Great.
No, that's hardly the end. So, what do I think fairies are?
Yeah, and why? So why is it like? Why should we care about them? You know,
because they're real.
Because they're real.
Because they're real. Yes.
This podcast, though, is I might believe in fairies. So.
Well, you might believe in fairies, but I definitely do believe in fairies, and so do numberless people.
Yeah,
particularly in
Go with
Britain,
that.
Scotland, Wales.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Because I think is it in Iceland where they have like the like these rocks, like these piles of rocks that they wouldn't pave or develop because that's where the good folk live, right? And this is like atheist Iceland.
Yeah.
Weird. So yeah, that's I remember like reading about that a few years ago, and I just thought that was the weirdest thing. And I was Catholic at that point. I had no right to call other people weird, but because of we believe some pretty not insane but pretty crazy, strange things. So yeah, that's crazy. So yeah, this whole I thought this would be a good second episode because the podcast is titled I Might Believe in Fairies. And I should probably talk about fairies.
Yeah.
You we kind of met on Twitter and we hit it off, and I can't even remember how we started talking. I think we just started DMing each other, and
probably
I was like, hey, I'm starting this podcast. I'm gonna call it I Might Believe in Fairies. And then I think we're like, oh well, we should definitely talk because that's one of your big things is fairies. And we're both Catholic.
Yes.
And we're both practicing the faith. We're both reverts, which is which you mentioned that, which is really interesting. And my background is in the hard sciences, if you can believe that. This in no way makes, like Tolkien says in his on fairy stories. It doesn't. What did he say? Something about it doesn't mean like the sciences are not important or something. I can't remember what it was, but it's in there. He talks about it doesn't mean like you're escaping reality.
The escapism on fairy stories.
Yeah,
it's one. Basically, it's one thing for you'd be trying to escape reality, but what he was talking about was if you're in prison, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying to escape the prison.
Yeah, I was
and
like
if
that
you're
line.
stuck there, to not be interested that much in talking about guards and bars and
right, everything
that is the prison.
It's the escape of the prisoner and not the flight of the deserter. That's what it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be good for episode 2 to be about fairies. And we're going to talk about what they are, and
if we can,
if we ever get there. And I think it'd be interesting to talk about the different theories, and then like if there's an official Catholic Church position on it, and how to avoid superstition. I think that's important as well.
All right.
So
let me pause you right there, if I could.
Sure.
Avoiding superstition. Okay, so we're talking about the good folk, as they would say. How hard has it been for us to actually make things meet up to have this episode to talk about fairies?
Yeah, I suppose. We've had to reschedule a couple of times. I mean,
several times. Yeah.
There was that thing that happened on Friday, which we won't talk about.
No politics. No.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then, yeah, I mean, it wasn't that bad, but yeah, we had to reschedule a few times.
Yep.
We're finally doing it now, and things seem to be working.
Hopefully,
it's recording. I'm watching it record right now.
I'm going to go ahead and knock wood. Yeah. I'll be the superstitious one.
I always bless my computer with holy water before I use it. So.
Oh wow.
That's it's what I do.
That'll
now.
Keep you out of trouble.
It keeps me out of trouble, and it's actually been quite helpful. So yeah, we were talking about fairies and superstition
and what they might be.
So, what are fairies?
All right. Huge speculations. There are a number of ideas of what they might be. We can go from the secular to the spiritual, which I think is the best way to do it.
Yeah, let's start with the secular. What would these? Because like Iceland, very secular country. What's the reasoning there?
Okay, by secular, I don't really mean that they still have fairy traditions, but are unbelieving in anything supernatural. I don't mean that.
Okay.
I mean, okay. There is okay. The best example to bring up would be Bigfoot.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's also the island of, what is it, Flores, where the prehistoric hobbits.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
You've never heard of them?
No.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so there's like there was a 3-foot tall hominid subspecies that have been called hobbits.
Huh.
You know. So
where is it? Where is this, you said?
I think it's an island in the oh goodness, it's not coming to mind. Around there with Indonesia, places that
okay.
General location, yeah.
Oh, Flores Man, is that what it is?
Huh?
Flores Man.
Yes, definitely not Florida Man, which is what I heard. Yeah.
It's in Indonesia. I'm looking it up now. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we have these stories, and sometimes, in the case of the hobbits, we actually find remnants. I'm not trying to say an archaeological proof, but we find a basis for the legend in reality. So we actually don't know if modern humans interacted with these creatures, these hobbit creatures, but they do have stories about them. And the same could be, I'm not saying could be the case all across Europe, which is pretty much where we're going to be focusing, I think.
Yeah. So I guess part of the reason we wanted to talk about this at all, and you mentioned this, we had a conversation a couple days ago, which I thought went really well. And you mentioned that in the Western world, we're a little too rationalistic, where we kind of
Exactly.
put
Yes.
reason
Yes.
on a pedestal above everything else. Whereas traditionally, reason was a handmaid of theology, right? That's kind of how it's
There you go. Yeah.
supposed to work. And so we take everything. Everything is so rationalistic.
Everything has to have a little category, and we can put any little fact into it, and everything fits,
right,
and makes a perfect little puzzle of reality.
And fairies would be, and things like Bigfoot and like maybe even UFO encounters. Those would all fit in the category of, or they wouldn't fit in the category. They don't fit.
No, they don't.
They don't fit. They don't fit. And then the medievals, when they were dealing with, trying to figure out what fairies might be, and C.S. Lewis, I'm reading The Discarded Image right now, he kind of goes over this. They're these like liminal creatures that they're like these vague, they don't fit into categories. And there are all these legends and stories, like in the Grimm's fairy tales, and in Iceland, still in modern day Iceland, and other places, I'm sure, where they still have, like my grandfather told me stories when I was a child about trolls. And he would try to convince me, and I don't know if he actually believes that they're real or not, but he would convince me that they're real, They
are. Yeah, they are.
Right? And so he's Norwegian, and so he'd tell me all these stories about trolls and how they don't like the sun, and a little off topic, but kind of similar. So I'd stay at his house, my grandparents' house, during the summer for weeks at a time, and he'd tell us, my brother and I, these stories about I don't know if you've ever heard of this creature called the Bussy Mine.
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay, I don't know if he made it up or not. He's still alive, so maybe I'll ask him.
Probably not, because it sort of sounds like man is in there. So
yeah,
we might need to look at the philology.
I'd have to ask him how to spell it. I've never even seen it written down. But he would tell us, we'd go into his basement, and he'd say, oh yeah, the Bussy Mine's down there, and if you see it, it's too late. And so I'm like 10 years old, my brother is like 4.
Yeah.
And so we're just terrified, absolutely terrified of going to the basement in his house, because we're going to get eaten or killed or something by this creature. And he'd tell us these stories all the time, and he'd talk about trolls and gnomes, and he can't, like, he'd always blame the gremlins for stealing his tools, and
yes,
it's just, I'm kind of thinking about that now. I'm like, Dad, what a weird but very entertaining.
I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, but
sounds normal to me. I mean,
seems normal, yeah. I mean, and if I go to Norway, maybe it's extremely normal too. But but I'm an American, right? So we don't, we're not supposed to believe in weird things.
Okay, but hold right there. Okay, something goes missing in your house.
Mm-hmm.
And do you guys say, okay, there must be ghosts? There must be ghosts. That's why we can't find the keys, because there must be ghosts.
No, we just say we misplaced the keys.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you know what I do think, though, sometimes we pray to St. Anthony is a big help to us for finding things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think he moves stuff around.
Okay.
Sometimes
well, then
I
you
think
got the same principle there.
Yeah, so fair enough. But sometimes I think when we I think sometimes the item is gone, right? Like just gone. Yeah. It's just off the face of the earth. It's gone. And St. Anthony is just like almost like having a divine joke at our expense,
it's the same principle, yes.
That's not
it's
impious
the same
to say,
as me blaming the fairies for something going missing.
Yeah, my grandpa would blame gremlins for stuff going missing, and I always thought that was pretty. I never thought it was that weird, honestly, when I was a kid, because it was just my grandpa,
I mean, yeah.
So these creatures, they don't fit into categories, and there's all these stories going back to the ancients, the ancient pagans, about these creatures, and then when Christianity comes, they try to, like the medievals try to categorize everything, and they try to fit these things into categories. So they didn't stop believing in these creatures simply because they were Christians, but they did struggle to fit them into categories.
Well, one of the stories was that fairies were angels that didn't take a side
Yep.
in the war between God and Satan. I mean, clearly, it's not theologically sound.
Right.
We know that.
Makes an interesting story, but it's
yes.
Yeah, I don't see how that could be reconciled. But yeah, that was one of the theories, that they were like neutral angels, and they were cast down to earth but not to hell, right? So they are here, and then at the end of time they'll either be reconciled or they'll just go to hell or be destroyed or be annihilated. I don't know, but again, those things aren't really.
Wait, if we actually look at Tolkien and you notice the sadness of the elves, because their fate is intertwined with Arda, then you have a taste of the medieval idea of fairy, these beings that were cast down but could not die. There would be no true joy for them that they previously experienced until the culmination of time. So,
with that theory, in Tolkien, I don't remember when they have their end times, would the elves they wouldn't be annihilated, right? Would they go back to the Valar, or would they? This isn't a Tolkien podcast, but we're probably going to be talking a lot about Tolkien.
I'm not a Tolkien expert.
Okay. I don't remember, but I guess it's not that important. But it does kind of illustrate that idea.
They all ended up going to the West.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Except for the ones that stayed here. Yeah, they chose to give up that life. So they all went to the West, and that was pretty much wrapped up. And there are some Tolkien writings that are really fascinating, but this isn't the episode for that, where the fate of men is discussed. Yeah. Man,
yeah, Tolkien's great. Yeah. So that's one theory, is that we think it's not quite tenable theologically. The other one, there's a bunch, but there's another one, is that they're a distinct race. Like,
yes.
They're not human, they're not angels, but they're something else. They're like some third thing. That might work. I don't know. And then I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, or should we move on to the one where they're all demons?
There's a little in between spot, and previous to our conversation, I had a conversation with one of my coworkers, who's a very quiet and thoughtful man, and I was like, yeah, so I'm going to be doing this thing on fairies. What do you think fairies are? And immediately he said, I think they're the angels of the forest, and that they don't really have anything to do with humanity.
Yeah.
In the way, angels and demons do. They have their own thing.
Yeah, they're like in charge of managing the forest, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or, it is interesting. I had never heard of that before you told me that. Yeah, I'd never heard of that theory before, that they just don't have anything to do with us.
Yeah.
And these stories of like these encounters, they're dangerous because, they're, even if they're good, right, they're still dangerous because they're these, they're all super powerful entities that if you stumble upon them when you're not ready to see something like that, it could be very bad.
Yes.
Yeah, they could, there are different stories, like they'll whisk you off to, feast with them, and you think you're gone for 2 hours, but you're gone for like 200 years or something like that, and everybody.
Yeah, they mess with time.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or because of their presence, time gets messed with. It's not really clear, because these are primitive stories.
Right.
And we can't make the mistake of taking our modern sensibilities and overlaying them on our ancestors. Like, obviously, a peasant in the 1300s isn't going to think, oh, well, obviously, Johann was lost in the woods for 100 years and came back because of time dilation. No, there's no such thing as physics back then, really.
You're right. They wouldn't think that's the biggest mistake I think we make.
Yes.
In modern Western cultures that we tend to project because we have a completely different view of a worldview. Even Christians, even Christians have I don't want to say it's materialistic, but it's definitely scientific, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, I'm a scientist, so I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. But it's a completely different worldview. It's completely alien to what a medieval peasant or an ancient Greek, would think. Right. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And I think that's a huge problem, like now in general, like just not being able to get out of your own head and think like try to get in the head of someone different than you. Yeah. So are they demons though?
I don't think so.
So this is whenever I come across stuff online, in the Catholic world about fairies, there is a large number of people who just say they're demons, and I think that's probably a safe assumption, just so you stay away from it.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it would be the safest assumption.
Because I'm not going to go out in the woods and look for fairies, even if they're angels, like even if they're good, I'm not going to go look for them, and nobody should do that.
No.
It's like testing God, right? It's like tempting God, kind of, in a way.
There are actually books on how to find fairies and how to commune with fairies, and so I grew up with a more enchanted worldview than many people do, simply because of my background and my ancestry and all of that.
You're Eastern European?
Yes.
Okay.
So things are a lot more hazy as far as fairies and things like that go. But it would be wise to avoid them.
Yeah, I said,
these books, I see them. I mean, obviously, I do research on the topic. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the topic, but books like How to Find Fairies, How to Commune with Fairies, I'm like, no, this is a very bad idea. Like, all of our folklore is how to keep them away or appease.
Yeah, exactly. How to
not
avoid
to hang out.
them.
No.
And whenever they show up in stories, it's, the peasants going like, "Holy crap, what is that?" Like, don't hide. Don't go near them.
That even happens today.
Really?
That still happens today. There are still sightings. They're not as frequently reported as UFO sightings because who's going to listen to fairies when there are aliens? So there's a little bit of replacement happening there. Okay, the whole aliens fairies thing, and
is there a connection?
So there is this replacement that goes on, where what would be a fairy encounter in Europe, in the United States, is described as an alien encounter.
Okay, aliens might be fairies.
Well,
we don't go there.
Yeah, aliens could be a lot of things, but I tend toward them being demons.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
The title of the show. I'm agnostic about these things.
Yeah, even then, it's just to be on the safe side. Yeah, they're probably demons.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think that there's anyone coming here from out there.
From outer space or something, like another...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably
I do not believe in that.
I'd be really shocked if aliens actually existed, and they weren't just some other paranormal phenomenon or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I guess that's a good warning. We're not telling anyone. In fact, we're discouraging people from trying to encounter anything supernatural outside of God's providence.
Exactly.
He'll let you experience something. God will choose you to experience something if that's what He wants to do. Don't try to, contact creatures that, will melt your brain and eat you, That's my advice to anybody. If you want to encounter fairies, read them in fairy tales.
That would be the best place.
That's the best way to do it. It's safe.
Yes. Not entirely safe, but at least you're getting you're getting tools to deal with these liminal places.
Okay, so you just said liminal places. I had that on our list of things to talk about. So why don't we? That's a good segue. That's a good segue.
The big list that I have to apologize to your listeners to, that I didn't read all the way through.
We were supposed to do it. We were supposed to do all of them. No, I did not expect us to get through all of those. But liminal spaces is interesting. So fairies, they're these liminal creatures. They don't fit into categories. You know, even C.S. Lewis, when he's describing them, has a bunch of different theories as to what they could be, and nobody really knows for sure. And
can we let's stop right there for a moment.
Sure.
When we look at Tolkien and Lewis, these men were not fools. These were highly educated scholars.
Yeah, they weren't country peasants or something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to use their terminology, to relegate fairy stories to the children's nursery is foolishness, because they weren't stories written specifically to children. They were simply stories, the folk stories, the stories that the people told around their hearth.
Usually adults.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Tolkien is so we're not a couple of crazy people talking about this, because this is in C.S. Lewis. You know, this is.
I don't know about me, but okay.
No, I'm saying well, okay. I'm frequently telling people that I think I'm going crazy, not because of this podcast, but just because maybe having children.
Yeah.
So this isn't like so out there. You know, this is in an accessible book by C.S. Lewis called The Discarded Image, where he's talking about these things, and he takes it seriously, and he's trying to address what these creatures are. You know, and it's a whole book on describing the medieval model, like the medieval worldview, the cosmology, which is really interesting.
I'm reading that, but I'm stuck in the cosmology thing. And it is fascinating because it connects with his cosmic trilogy, which are some of my favorite books.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah. The space trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not a couple of maybe we are a couple of cranks. I don't know. Maybe. But this is something that C.S. Lewis thought was serious enough to include it in his book, and it wasn't crazy to him.
He's not a frivolous man.
No, he's not a frivolous man. And neither was Tolkien. Tolkien was a very serious scholar, who was a world-renowned philologist and Old English expert.
Medievalist.
Yeah, yes. Medievalist. And so these things are not. I'm just trying to make a disclaimer. These things are not like, we're not just kooks. This is something that people in Iceland still believe, and across. Not that Iceland should be our model for how we, what we should believe, but.
Let me pause you there. I don't think that I have anything to prove to anyone.
No, but you don't, but I do.
If they think I'm crazy, I'm okay with that. If they want to listen,
I have
okay
a family.
with that too.
Lose my job? No. Yeah, no, I get it. But
the fact of the matter is, the cranks are being proved right again and again and again.
Yeah, that's. I wish it weren't so, but it is.
No.
So okay, that going forward. So liminal spaces. So you have things like, in C.S. Lewis, you have like the wardrobe, where it's like this boundary between our world and Narnia, and in other fairy tales, you have people kind of stumbling into fairy.
You have the fairy fort, which the fairy fort was usually burial mounds. So when you're reading The Lord of the Rings and they go to the barrows, and there's these spirits, the whites, those were the inhabitants of the barrows. So these ancient kings, these spirits of kings. And in some sense, if we look at Irish fairy tales, a lot of the fairies were ancient kings.
Okay.
Not all of them, but there were waves of invasions, and as you push back, you get in time. As you push back in time, things are closer and closer to fairy than they are to, okay, these were an actual tribe of people that came, but now they're supernatural people.
So yeah, you have these spaces where you can encounter these creatures. Not that you're trying to, but you will fall into the realm of fairy, and
yes.
And so things like when I was a kid, like fairy rings, right? Like the toadstools in a circle. What other sort of like? Again, we're not encouraging anybody to go try any of this stuff, but
and it won't necessarily happen if you're trying.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even if you try, it's nothing will probably happen, honestly.
Unless you if you're a little caveat, if you're a superb musician, then definitely stay away from toadstool rings. If you've got a particularly beautiful child, have that child stay away from toadstool rings. If you're a regular Yahoo, one of us, dorks, just wandering around trying to find fairies, it's unlikely to happen because just like with dating, you're too needy.
Wow.
I'm sorry, but
that is
yeah.
Well, I'm safe. That's good. Gosh. So you have these toadstool. What other sort of liminal spaces? You mentioned the burial mounds.
Yes, the fairy forts, fairy tracks.
What are those?
Which a fairy track is the secular way to explain it would be animal tracks. Mm-hmm. Like tracks in the woods.
Sure.
Here we have deer tracks, so you can follow a deer track and get yourself extremely lost if you're not careful. I'm a huge hiker. I love hiking, and you have to be very careful because some of these tracks can look exactly like a foot track, but if you end up following an animal track, then you could place yourself very much in danger.
Sure.
And we can say that yes, these are animal tracks, but what if they're not?
Yeah. See, this is the paranoia stuff. Always? This is what I wanted to talk about too. It's like, how do you avoid just going crazy and thinking everything is fairy? I guess maybe just carry your holy water with you or something.
I don't recall having gone hiking with my holy water and blessed salt with me, but I guess. And
would that even work? Would they be? I mean, I guess if they were demons, they would be repelled. So
yeah.
And if they're angels, if they're actually angels, then nothing would happen. Because that's what some saints would tell you. If you have this supernatural experience and something appears to you, throw holy water at it, and if it's a demon, it'll go away or get worse, and you'll know it's a demon, or nothing will happen, and then you're on safer ground.
I can't remember which of the fathers it was, but just always assume it's a demon.
Yeah, always assume it's a demon.
Just always say go away.
Right. Like, throw holy water at it and tell it to go away, and get yourself a priest.
Yeah.
That's the best. Yeah, and if it doesn't go away, and it also doesn't get worse, and it doesn't start attacking you, yeah, then it might be an angel, it might be Mary. I don't know. Okay, so that's what fairy tracks are. Going back to those.
I don't think we really explained them.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
What they could be, what they couldn't be, but we don't know what they are.
Okay.
So sometimes they could be animal tracks. Sometimes they could be something else. But we're still in the liminal spaces.
Yeah.
And this is a place in the woods within the woods. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like already the woods, the forest, is a liminal space.
Yeah, it's a space on the edge.
Yes, and this is a trail in the middle place. You're not at your destination. You're not at home. You're in the forest.
Okay, yeah.
Which is sort of chaos. And then here's a track. It could be a human foot track.
Yeah.
It could be an animal trail, and it could be something else.
See, it's that something else that just scares the crap out of me a little.
Yeah.
Because whenever you go in the woods, at least in my experience, and you're by yourself, it's creepy. Even if it's in broad daylight, it's better if it's in broad daylight. But you always just feel like something's out there. And I never.
Something is out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would never feel like.
There's a lot of somethings out there.
I never feel like I was in grave danger. Even if you're just looking at it
from a materialist view,
yeah,
there is a lot watching you.
Like mountain lions and bears and squirrels and all that stuff. Okay, interesting. Do you have anything else to add about the fairy tracks?
Not on that particular, no.
Okay. So, is it kind of like with Narnia?
I love Narnia.
Yeah, I know you do. You can't enter Narnia just whenever you want. You can't. You have to be called. Is that kind of how it works? Is it kind of the same with like these? Like the fairies have to want you. Like you were saying about dating. If you're not dateable, they don't want anything to do with you.
You can't force your way into Narnia.
Yeah. Like we couldn't invade
You're
fairy.
invited. Well, I mean, within Narnia, there are countries that have invaded Narnia, but
yeah. But like from our world perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a oh my goodness. I think it's called A Companion to Narnia, and you can put this in the notes to the episode. I'll give you the actual title. But there are actually a series of maps of the world. So in Narnia, the Narniad,
mm-hmm.
you go from our world, Narnia, and Charn. That's where the White Witch came from, her planet. And they're all sort of, I'll actually send you a picture of the map. They're all sort of centered like bubbles around Aslan's country that we run into. I think it's in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because Reapy Cheap goes there. He leaves the crew and goes on. So there's this glimpse of Aslan's country, which we also get a glimpse of in the last battle. But our worlds are sort of bubbles around there, and there's certain meeting points, like the wardrobe is made, we find out in Magician's Nephew, from the tree that grew from the apple, or the fruit, I'm not sure if it's an apple specifically, that Diggory brought back from Narnia as it was being sung into being by Aslan after he passed the test of obedience. Have I gone too deep? Because I love Narnia the way Tolkien scholars love Tolkien.
No, that's fine.
I mean, I've got there's less material, but I know it. So
yeah, no, it's great, and that's why I'm using the wardrobe as an example of kind of entering into this other realm where it's not, you can't just go whenever you want.
Right.
You have to be called, or it has to be providence or whatever. And with these,
well, there's a connection. There's always connection.
Yeah.
So even if we look at the Magician's Nephew and the rings that are used to transport the children between the worlds, the dust came from Atlantis, which in Tolkien would be Numenor.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it is so wonderful that they were friends. So lovely for us.
Yeah.
Because it's interwoven. So we have this, in the case of the rings, there's a connection to an otherworldly place, our Atlantis. And that leads us to Charn, which leads us eventually to Narnia, being sung into being, which leads us to the tree. And Diggory was able to take the apple from the tree to give to his mother, and he planted the seeds, which became a tree, which he turned into a wardrobe, which the Pevensies, the children in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, were able to pass through back again into Narnia. So, Yes, I mean these are liminal spaces, but they're connected spaces.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I
They
see.
all belong to the same continuity.
Yeah, and it's good that we're kind of, even though my first episode I talked about not wanting to talk about. I mean, not necessarily not wanting to talk
Oh,
about
we're going to end up there.
C.S.
We're always going
Lewis
to end
and
up with
Tolkien,
Yeah.
because I love them both, but they get talked about a lot, and but they're so useful to like use as examples. Another couple of examples of like these. If people have ever read the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, the Martians I think function a lot like fairies.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
I don't know if Ray Bradbury always said he wasn't writing science fiction; he was writing myth. I think that's what he said. And so he always kind of rejected the science fiction label, and he wanted to, he claimed he was writing myth, which I 100% agree with him. And so like the Martians in the Martian Chronicles are, very much function like fairies. Like, so in the beginning, you've read them, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah,
since I was a kid, yeah.
Yeah. So in the first, it's like an interconnected. If anybody hasn't read it, it's a series of interconnected like short stories that kind of thematically all come together. It's all about Earth basically colonizing Mars, and the Martians who live there, who are the original people living there, their experiences of the humans, and then like trying to keep the humans out, and then eventually the humans come and kind of conquer the land and stuff, and the fairies see, look, the Martians become they become in like the hidden people. You only encounter them. Yeah, so it's really interesting.
And even the changeling figure shows up in the Martian Chronicles.
Yeah, exactly. The changeling shows up, and then at the end, the Earthlings who live there, they are the Martians now. They are the Martians. That's kind of how it ends. And so, yeah, when I read that, I did not make that connection until I read Gene Wolfe's Fifth Head of Cerberus, the 3 novella collection, and the third story, where it's like the expedition, into the wilderness, where they're trying to find evidence of the original.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
You're gonna wanna
explain,
edit that, because that's the second story. The third story is the trial of what's his face, isn't it?
It's connected. So the third story is.
Oh yeah, they're all interconnected.
Well, the third story goes back and forth between the prison where Marsh was, placed, and his expedition. So the third novella is him going back and forth between the prison and him. And so Fifth Head of Cerberus, again, I'm kind of going through this, just using it as an example of fairies in our podcast.
Hold on 1 second again. Okay, edit out me being stupid.
Sounds good. I'll try.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh.
That's not a slight to you. It's a slight to me not being able to work my editing software. So jokes on both of us. So the Fifth Head of Cerberus is these 3 short stories, 3 novellas that are connected, and the first one, that all takes place at these 2 sister planets that have been colonized by the French. And in the third novella, one of the characters is searching for the original inhabitants of the planet, the Aborigines. And they're
can't call them the other word.
Huh?
We cannot call them the other word.
What? Oh, okay.
Yeah, the word used in the book is actually a racial slur now.
Yes. I have been to Australia, and they refer to the Aboriginals as the word used in the book. And that's not nice. It's not.
No.
And I don't really have an opinion on it. It's just the word they use in the book. So that's kind of, it's fine. It's just what Gene Wolfe uses, and I can't change
exactly.
that. So they he's looking for he's an anthropologist. He's looking for it, and the Aborigines there are very fairy-like. You know, they're like the hidden
Yeah,
people.
they are.
It's when I read that, I immediately thought Martian Chronicles, and then I immediately thought Fairies. I'm like, okay, Ray Bradbury and Gene Wolfe are both using the Martians, equating the alien creatures as fairies, fairy-like creatures.
Who
so that's my very
live
long-winded.
in a liminal place where dreams. They're
Mhm.
dreams. The two brothers, Sandwalker and
Eastwind.
Huh?
Right? Eastwind and Sandwalker.
Yeah, Eastwind and
Mhm.
Sandwalker. Yeah, they're connected through dreams, and you have the liminal figures of the Night Children, which you find out what they are.
Yep.
later
And
on. But these are all fairy folk.
Right. And Eastwind and Sandwalker, they're species, they're shapeshifters.
And twins.
Yeah.
They're twins.
Yeah, which is another
That's
fairy
also, yeah.
trope. Yeah, yeah. So that was my long-winded way of tying in more fiction into discussion, this discussion, because that's kind of what this podcast is too, is just, you know, talking about books, but also talking about, you know, the myths and things that kind of make these books.
Yes.
So, yeah, if anybody wants to read Gene Wolfe's Fifth Head of Cerberus or The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, please do so. They're fantastic. Fantastic books.
Yeah.
So those are the liminal spaces.
You're doing your imagination a service.
Well, yes, exactly, yeah. So, we talked about Tolkien and his elves. So are fairies and elves, are they the same? Are those words interchangeable? Okay.
No, it's not interchangeable. Okay, so fairy describes a place and a condition of being. So there's a number of beings that are sort of held under the umbrella of fairies. So under fairies, you would have kobolds, you would have redcaps, you would have brownies,
pixies,
you would have
stuff like that.
Yeah, piskies. We have it pixie, but piskies, the puka, all sorts of beings from all across Europe. As far as the colonization of America, there are beings here that were encountered by the Welsh and the Irish that have been described as fairies, but they're probably their own beings. Okay. I mean, they are their own beings, obviously, but because we walk around with stories in our own heads, we place those stories onto what we see. We
come with our own preconceived notions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, let's say in my particular case, I encountered Bigfoot, I would probably see a giant because of my cultural lens and what I study. And that actually has happened, but that was an entirely different podcast.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So what are elves then?
Elves, before Tolkien, were a lot like dwarves in Tolkien.
Okay.
So they were clever. They were tectons, like workers in metal and jewels and things like that. But they weren't particularly beautiful the way they are. Tolkien actually did make elves beautiful.
Yeah, he kind of, I don't want to say subverted, because he's not subverting anything, but he changed some of the lore, I guess. He kind of changed some of the tropes around.
He did, yeah.
Yeah. He kind of redeemed elves, in a way. He kind of made them...
Yes. Better than they are.
Yeah, which is interesting. The first time I read Lord of the Rings, I didn't know that. So I thought that's how elves were always depicted. But they're not. When you look at the old stories, it's like, oh no, they can be quite nasty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Tolkien, it's interesting. Like they'll kidnap you and your children, and or is that fairy? So who switches your children out with a changeling? Instead of do fairies do that, or elves, or both?
Well, it's the same species. There are a number of species. It's the same state of being.
Okay.
Same sorts of beings. So yeah.
I see. Okay.
If you have okay.
So they're all these liminal creatures.
If a person in the Middle Ages had a stroke, it would be attributed to elf shot because they would find Neolithic remains of arrowheads and things like that, and they were small. So clearly, small people did this.
Yeah.
And they also had cultural memory of having battles with more primitive inhabitants of the areas that they were making incursions into.
Yeah, that kind of.
So
yeah,
some
okay.
of it is cultural memory. Some of it is, hey, we found these itty bitty arrowheads, so they must have belonged to itty bitty people, and therefore people have strokes.
Wow.
Because of elf shot.
So what about dwarves? You mentioned that elves pre-Tolkien were more depicted like Tolkien's dwarves. What are dwarves and elves? Are they synonymous? Are they? Because I know I think it was in Tolkien's translation of Sigurd and Gudrun. Maybe not. There was a dwarf who changed into the dragon that Sigurd killed, right?
Fafnir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know my dragons.
Yeah, he changed into Fafnir. So that's not what we're used to with dwarves either. So I'm wondering, if with some of these creatures, they're more, they're liminal, right? So they're hard to pin down what they are.
And it's not only that, but so are the inhabitants of the areas that we're speaking of. So you have a blending of German myth or legend, French myth or legend, the ancient stock of the island blending. You've got Norse blending. It's like a hot pot of all of these different cultures.
All kind of mixing and sharing stories and legends and stuff.
Yeah. So the dwarves, if you look at the Disney version of Snow White, that would be a dwarf, and that would also be an elf. So these were beings that really had nothing to do with humanity. They had their own business, their own interests, and they didn't blend with us. It was always accidental. But always, and this goes as far as dragons too, always is involved treasure. So even if you look at, this is going way back, but Darby O'Gill and the Little People, did you see that?
No.
All right, so Darby O'Gill, it's an Irish sort of fantasy where Darby O'Gill ends up hanging out, obviously, with the Little People, and it brings you into all kinds of, I guess, tropes about interactions with fairies. Like, they do live underground. They are interested in gold. They mine it. They craft it. But if we try to take, and this is very interesting, if we try to take, it comes up again and again and again in stories, if we try to take fairy gold, when we come back into our world, it's like leaves or dirt or even excrement.
Is it the enchantment of fairy? It doesn't, it's not going to transfer over here?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean...
Yeah, because you find all these riches, right, and you try to bring them back, and they, you know, it's nothing.
They spoil.
They spoil. Yeah, they spoil. Oh,
and that's
okay.
reflected. It actually is reflected in the gospel message.
Okay, do it. What is it? I want to know.
The riches of this world are basically the same as those leaves and that excrement and the passing things. Okay, so if we look at those, and I hate to bring up excrement again and again and again, but obviously it's a thing that passes. Okay, and leaves. Okay, leaves. They fall from the trees and they rot. So these are all transitory things.
They're discarded.
Right. So if we try to take from the other world, and I hate using that because they use that, if we try to take from fairy riches and bring them here, it sort of brings the transcendent into time. See, we live in time. Mm-hmm. So if we're trying to bring something from above, like from heaven, even though obviously fairy, not heaven, but if we're trying to bring something from heaven and pin it down and say, this is mine, it turns into rot and sickness. and
Yeah.
decay and death. Did that make sense?
I think so.
I hope so. I'm saying that you can't bring there to here because we can't have there.
It'd be like, yeah, you're taking the spoils of heaven and trying to bring it here. It's not for here, you know.
Right.
It's not
Exactly.
It's not meant for here. It's like if you tried to steal the Ark of the Covenant, you know, and use it or touch it when you're not worthy, it'll kill you.
We have exactly one place where it is safe and okay and expected for us to interact with the other. And that's in the sacrifice of the Mass.
Right.
That is, I mean, it has been made safe. And like you said, with the Ark of the Covenant, touching it, that brought death.
Yeah, which is another one of those, the excrement, you know, and the leaves and dirt, those are kind of symbols of death. Yeah.
Yes.
And so when you steal that, you steal the riches that you're not meant for, it'll result in death, basically, or whatever you have
Right.
will be. Yeah. So yeah, I that makes sense. And with the similar thing with the Holy of Holies, you know, the ancient, which we now have as the Mass, yeah, right, as the tabernacle. You can't. You know, only the high priest could interact and live, and only once a year.
Yeah.
And now it's been made safe, like you said. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I mean, obviously, I wouldn't go up and touch the tabernacle in my church. I mean, even though I know.
But we can be there, and we can receive the Eucharist. And as long as we're in the right disposition and a state of grace, we're not going to, you know, it's not going to condemn us. It'll do the opposite.
I still wouldn't even dare to touch the tabernacle in my church.
No. And that's not what I'm saying either. Yeah. I did not know about that. I think I remember reading stories about trying to steal gold from fairy, and it just ends up being, you know, twigs or leaves, which I never knew what to make of that, and now that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We talked about maybe one of the last things we talk about, and then we'll kind of get into maybe one more thing after this. So we talked about Tolkien kind of changing elves and changing the depiction of elves. There have been other shifts in how fairies and angels even are portrayed from, you know, pre-Christian times to modern.
Yeah.
You know, there was a shift from the Renaissance to the Victorian period, and then from Victorian to modern. You know, so there've been shifts in how angels are portrayed in art, how fairies are portrayed. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. What we were talking about, what I brought up was the idea of Tinkerbell, and how since the Victorian period, there have been several shifts, but the Victorian era was a major shift where fairies became sanitized. So they're cute. They're like butterflies. They're like little sparkly lights.
Little
they're
flowers.
tiny.
Yeah.
They're adorable. But if you read Peter Pan, Tinkerbell was a proper fairy. She was murderous.
Yeah. She was jealous, right?
Yeah, she hated the human mortal Wendy, because there's a lot of reasons why that was because. But Wendy represented a threat. But as far as Tinkerbell herself goes, she is symptomatic of angels becoming cute. I mean, fairies becoming cute, and also angels becoming cute little, like, okay, the word cherub.
Yeah.
Fat little baby with wings. No, cherubs are terrifying.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. They have like 6 wings and 4 heads, or what? You know? Yeah. And now we think with cherubs, we think the fat little babies, you know, that
playing instruments,
like Cupid, you know, with the bow and arrow and little hearts and just insane things, you know, very weird.
Actually, Cupid was also terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, how could he not be? You'd never want to encounter any of these creatures, really, ever. But that in the Victorian period, you had this shift in depiction to a more cutesy, sort of tamed and sanitized version. Why is that?
Because that was when fairy tales went from folk tales, the tales of the people, as we mentioned before. That's when those stories were sent to the nursery. They were sanitized for children. So you've got a few little warnings, but it's mostly these are cute beings. And I think that's kind of what leads to what we see today with books like How to Find Fairies.
Yep, that is a huge connection. Because if they're cute
When
and sanitized,
when
they're
they
not
were
dangerous.
cute and sanitized, they stopped being the other,
Right.
which is what, in fact, they are. We can't pin down what they are.
They're
but
the
they
archetypal
are the
other. If that's a way to say it, I guess they're the perpetual other. Where they're dangerous,
the non-human. I mean, set aside all of the stuff going on today. This is a state of being that is not a human state of being. So at one point, I had a huge argument where I was accused of monstering the other, which is to say that I was turning other human beings into monsters. And that's not what's happening right now. That's not what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying the monsters are the monsters. We are us. They are the other. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter what you feel. We are us. We are humans. And they are not. They are something other. And frequently in stories, they are hostile to us. So we must be careful. And that's the story of fairy all across the board. Across all cultures. Across all times. This is unsafe.
Yeah.
Avoid.
Yeah, now we have stories where, going from the cutesy to they're your friend. You shouldn't even have
friendly, like in the case of brownies.
Mm-hmm.
They can't be friendly, but that doesn't mean they're your friends.
Well, and I think when we mentioned this on our conversation last time, Aslan is not a tame lion. He's good.
Exactly.
But he's not tame, I don't think he's not safe, he's good. And that's the important thing. Right. And so these creatures, well, they might not be evil. They're certainly dangerous. They're perilous.
And they're not really concerned with us.
Yeah. Yeah, so these books where like, how to talk to fairies. It's like I've had priests say, you shouldn't even name your guardian angel, Right. You should have a relationship with them, you should ask them to help you and stuff like that, but
exactly,
you are not like naming is like claiming dominion over something, and you do not have that relationship with your guardian angel.
Yet.
And so even
Yet.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot we don't know about the world to come.
While we're here on Earth, it's like that is not the relationship that's been set up between you and your guardian angel.
Exactly.
It's not your place to give them a name. You should talk to them and pray, have them pray for you and help you through things and develop that relationship. But even then there are rules. And so how much more rules will there be with creatures who have nothing to do with you?
Right. And if we need to bring this back to the Bible. If we look at Genesis, man, species, is able to name animals. As first created, man, the sex, was able to name woman. Mm-hmm. So there is a hierarchy. So I can name animals, but obviously I can't name angels.
Yeah, exactly. Naming is, I don't know enough about it, but yeah, it has to do with dominion and
it does,
place in the hierarchy, and that is also not something that we can say very loudly.
Right?
For most,
I even went a little too far with saying that as a woman, I can only name animals.
Well, that is a different conversation that I am not prepared to have in any way, and I think there's a lot of friendly debate that could be had with that conversation. But it illustrates a point, right? So with these other entities, we don't have we should not have a relationship with them. If God wants there to be one, that's his deal. But with brownies and what did you call them?
Piskies.
Piskies.
Yes.
With these entities, if they exist,
they do.
Well, okay.
I mean, they just do.
If where any creature that is supernatural, we should not have anything to do with unless it has been ordained divinely somehow. And so when the Victorians made them cutesy, that was, first of all, it made them very boring in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have like these ancient, what's more interesting, an ancient cosmic creature that is ineffable and kind of unknowable in a way, or the cute little flower butterfly creature, it made them boring in a lot of ways. Now Tinkerbell's an exception because that story does retain a lot of the old.
It does, yes.
A lot of the old stories.
Well, there's not only one Peter Pan story. There are a couple. What's really interesting about Peter Pan is that the set of stories brings the language of birds into the narrative. So, yeah, Peter Pan basically grows up among birds. And the language of birds is a callback to the language before the Tower of Babel.
In the legend of Sigurd as well, when he drinks the blood, or he drinks the blood of Fafnir, he can understand the birds.
Yes.
Yeah.
The language of birds,
mm-hmm.
which is the original language. I mean, obviously, yeah, you can talk to animals, but if we look at all these stories, the animals can already talk. It's just that we can't hear them anymore. And Peter Pan never had that problem. He was basically, I don't know if it mentions if he was baptized or not, but it's frequent in story that an unbaptized child does have these sort of interactions with fairy. I think you brought that up at one point.
Yeah, in our earlier phone conversation. So, well, maybe in this one too. So, an unbaptized child, legends, say it's more susceptible to being switched with a changeling, with a creature that's not the child. And what would would it be the fairies who do that too?
Yeah, or demons.
Or demons. Okay, and then depending on if they're fairies, if what the fairies are, what would they do? So if the fairies are demons, if the fairies are angels, or if they're these third thing that doesn't fit into categories, what would they do with that child then? If they switched it out, I'm assuming demons would do something bad. We don't need to go into that, but if they were not gonna eat them or whatever.
Yeah. They would be raised in the fairy court.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then, the entity that they leave behind is not
good. Yeah, not good at all.
Yeah, like in the Martian Chronicles. Now, the Martian Chronicles, it was more sympathetic, but so yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna have to do a Hellboy. I just thought about a scene in the Hellboy comics that he deals with a changeling. He takes a pair of iron tongs and he picks the creature up by its legs and starts screaming. That's how he determines that it's not the child. Then he goes on a quest to go find and return the child to the family. That's in the comics, not in the movies.
And that sort of thing did happen in reality.
Yeah.
Where a changeling, someone suspected of being a changeling, would be placed on an implement of iron like a shovel and placed over fire until it cried out that it was from wherever it was.
What if they were wrong?
Yeah, what if they were actually human and just disabled and, or mentally ill? Yeah, horrible.
Yeah, oh gosh. Yeah, and that's not good. That's kind of why probably easier to just throw holy water.
Yeah, but it also illustrates how dangerous people thought that these beings could be. Like, what could drive parents to do that test?
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, right.
No, thank you.
Yeah, no thank you.
Man.
So it would have to be something.
Man, okay.
I mean, just having a sickly child, that's quite another thing, then I mean, humanity has always had sickly children.
Right.
We didn't need to put them to some sort of test, like driving iron into their feet, or placing them on a shovel over
Or
hot
fire.
coals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's.
So going off of that, and then we might wrap it up with just some last minute things. Did the church ever step in through history to like correct some of these beliefs? Like, did things, going off of like putting babies on shovels? Did that ever get out of hand where the church would step in and say, you can't do this anymore? Yeah. Like, this is horrible. Stop doing it. This is superstitious. You can't, don't do that anymore. Yeah. Because I don't think the church has I know I brought this up earlier. I don't think the church has any official position on whether or not these creatures exist. I would be surprised.
They don't.
Yeah, there's no official, because it's not related to our salvation. So there would be no
right.
There would be no official, because you can believe or not believe in fairies, and that won't affect your salvation unless you start trying to find them. Then that might cause some problems.
Then you get in trouble.
Yeah. You get in trouble for dealing with probably unclean spirits.
Wait, just so we're clear, it's not in trouble from the church. It's
in
trouble because you're opening a door.
Exactly, yeah, in trouble for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the church isn't going to come down on you, and it probably won't even know, but yeah. So
no, they wouldn't know until, there's a huge problem, and we need a particular sort of priest to come and fix it.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, that's another point to bring up, is that this is not, since it does not affect anybody's salvation. The church does not really weigh in on these things, and there's no official position either way, which kind of makes it fun. That's why we can talk about these things, and it's not gonna, there's no fairy heresy or anything that we need to worry about, or stepping on the toes of the Inquisition and something like that. So there's nothing like that's going to happen. So that's why it's kind of fun to talk about this stuff.
We call them the what are they? The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Is that what the Inquisition is now?
Yeah. That's what.
So they're not mean.
No, they just determine what is taught, and who. I don't know. To most people, everything that the church sounds mean and cruel, but
for some people, it's always going to be that.
Yeah, but it's just basically like, are people teaching sound doctrine? And that's what the CDF is for, I believe. Just making sure that people are teaching orthodox things, not not going to lead people astray. So yeah, that kind of, I wanted to bring that up a little bit, and
we're never going to get the imprimatur.
I wouldn't want one.
That's not going to happen.
I don't want a bishop to listen to this.
It's all speculation, folks.
Yeah. Yeah,
we could be wrong, and if the church says we're wrong, we submit.
Yep. If the church ever comes out with fairies are not real, or fairies are real,
what? They stop being real.
Exactly. So the last thing I want to do, if that's cool, unless you want to keep going, we could talk about your favorite depiction of fairies in books, movies, anything like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
Go for it.
Not a book, a movie. Legend.
Is that the movie? I've never seen that, but is that the movie with the big devil guy with the huge horns?
Yeah, but he's not the devil. He's darkness.
Okay. So I've never seen it, so you might have to.
Yeah, I'm working hard on a review of it because there's so much to review. It's a Ridley Scott movie, so obviously, and it's one of his more artistic works. Okay. So obviously, again, we're just compounding him on him.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it. I didn't know it was Ridley Scott. That's cool. I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, it's I've got a couple of threads in my pin tweet. Mm-hmm. That's at Katarinya Mariya.
That's important.
A little plug for myself.
Yep.
Not that I make anything from this. It's just, a point of interest.
Yeah.
Where the fairies depicted there are actually as close as you're going to get to their behavior in fairy stories.
How so?
Oh, I don't wanna spoil the movie. Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on
You can
because
spoil it.
you have Blix the Goblin, who's obviously evil. You have Brown Tom, who is your typical brownie. You have Gump, who is a leader of trooping fairies, which would be a sort of a court in the sense of he's somewhat of a king. So you have Gump, the Gump, not Gump, just the Gump. And they interact with this young man who is a forest child. So he has been raised among them. So, interestingly, if we look at that film, we can see what might have happened with children that were raised by fairies. You would end up with somebody like Jack, who is the main character.
Yeah, I've never
And
seen
then
it,
you have-
so I don't have much to add.
I'm going to go more into it.
No, go for it.
Then you have Luna, who is actually that. Okay, so the original depictions in plays of Tinkerbell was a flashing light and a bicycle bell.
Yeah.
So a little ringing bell and a light. And that is what she is, except when she's not. And when she's not, she's terrifying. So we have all of the elements of fairy in this movie. There's a whole lot of other stuff. I try to go into it. But if you're looking for how people understood fairy, that would be probably the closest in film that we've gotten.
Yeah. How about films that get it wrong? And do you know any off the top of your head? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot, but popular.
That movie about leprechauns.
The horror movie.
No. Oh my goodness.
That's probably closer, honestly.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah. Yeah, you don't. Yeah.
Yeah. What's
Except
the other
for
movie?
In the Hood, I don't know about that one. I think that was kind of exploitation-y. But
Leprechauns have rights too. No.
Oh no, I think it was The Legend of the Leprechauns.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really horrible. Oh, goodness gracious, what else? Obviously, anything Disney has to do with fairies.
Yeah, I heard something interesting about Disney.
Yeah.
That Walt Disney took a lot of his fairy tales from the French versions, which the guy, I can't remember his name, but he was like a 16th century French aristocrat who he changed a lot of the German stories to turn into morality tales.
Well, so the Brothers Grimm did that too, eventually.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, like, for instance, Little Red Riding Hood in the French version, Little Red gets eaten and dies and doesn't get rescued.
Yes, right.
And obviously in the Grimm's version, in the German version, the huntsman or whoever comes and saves her and Grandma from the wolf.
Right.
But in the French version, he changed it because he wanted to illustrate, what happens if you get in bed with a wolf, because he's trying to, these young ladies at the French courts, who he wanted he was trying to keep them on the straight and narrow. So he changed the stories and made them into morality tales, and then Walt Disney took much of those tales and turned them into movies, which is why they're so different, and obviously not all of them, but a lot of the earlier ones. So
Cinderella is actually a horrifying story.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no fairy god. Interestingly enough, there's no fairy godmother in the original Grimm's.
Right.
Yeah. And there's no you need to be back by midnight, because as one person said, what do you need if you're a young lady at the French court? What do you need most? You need a guardian and a curfew. So in the French version, that's what she has. She has the fairy godmother who's her guardian, and the be back by midnight, which is the curfew. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. So anything. Oh man, Disney. I don't like Disney. I used to like Disney. I don't like them anymore. After I've started reading the traditional German fairy tales, I'm like, these are so much more interesting. These are so much more interesting, And there's so much more rich.
Real.
Yeah, they're like real and they're rich. They have so many layers to them, and the Disney version is just not as, I don't know, it's just not as much meat there. So yeah, so that's a good point.
And,
The Disney ones
it has to be pointed out because you're going to get critics that say that those movies are made for children, but we were children growing up watching these movies. Okay, and they weren't any good.
Right. I watched them and I liked them.
Yeah.
But I got more out of watching Batman. That's what I remember watching more as a kid. Is those movies are more, or the movies, the cartoons, the superhero cartoons I used to watch are richer, I think, in many ways than a lot of the Disney movies, which is why I remember them still.
And they were a lot more developed. The cartoons and the movies that you grew up with, as opposed to the ones that I did, they were very simple morality tales.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, basically, don't do drugs. Don't mess around with fire in your house. Things like that. Those were cartoons when I was a kid. But you also had, which is interesting, I can remember Mr. Mixelplick, who was as close to fairy as I think
he was.
DC ever came.
He's a Superman villain. Yeah. Yeah. In case anybody doesn't know, Mr. Mixelplick is a Superman villain, where he would bother and annoy Superman to the point, and the only way he could go away is if Superman could get him, Mr. Mixelplick, to say his name backwards.
Exactly.
Yep. It's kind of like a Rumpelstiltskin kind of deal.
It's exactly a fairy trick.
Yep.
Yes.
And so Superman would have to do all these things to try to get him to trick him into saying his name backwards, or to try to spell it out in some way. Really pretty entertaining. I have a new love for Mr. Mixelplick as a villain.
Yeah. He really was awesome and terrifying.
He's really entertaining. And it was off topic, but it's related to fairies. In the Superman animated series from like the 90s, the voice actor for Mr. Mixelplick is the same. I forget his name. He's very famous. He was Iago. He was Iago, the parrot in Aladdin. He's that voice actor.
I'm going to be snooty here. I haven't seen Aladdin, and the only Iago I know is from Othello. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's where they got the name. I mean, Iago from Othello is much more interesting.
And terrible, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so Mr. Mixelplick is it's a modern
version of fairy.
Yeah, yeah. And Batman has one too, but he's Batmite. It's a knockoff of Mr. Mixelplick. Batman has to have one too. So so yeah, I think that's pretty good. Do you have any, before we go? Do you have any closing thoughts or any resources? So you say you do research on some of this stuff. Do you have any resources to share with people? Obviously nothing that will get them imperil their souls.
All right, so probably the most fun is the Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies by Robert Kirk. It's a very old book. And the other one would be Magical Folk, which is British. Having a hard time getting that coming up. British and Irish fairies.
Great. All right. Sounds good. And then any other closing thoughts? Any other remarks? Anything we didn't talk about that you'd want to bring up? I think we went through most of the list, honestly. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And it's only been, an hour and a half?
Yeah, yeah.
That's not too shabby. That's a good-sized podcast, and you're going to whittle it down, so I think that's good.
Okay. Great.
I do need to send you that map to Narnia, so you can tag that in the notes.
Yeah, I'm going to put that in I'm gonna make a list of all the books we mentioned too. So like the Martian Chronicles and Chronicles of Narnia and all that stuff. And I think another resource for people is just Tolkien's On Fairy Stories as well.
And the earliest edition that anybody can get of Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah. Yeah. The one
Before
with all the
sanitize
violence. Yeah. You want the one with the violence in it. And I think I have that because I got the Barnes and Noble one at like a used bookstore, and I've been reading it, and it, you know, they're pretty violent. They don't pull punches, so I think they.
Oh my goodness! Yes. Final thought. Hold on.
Yeah.
I need to look for this book. Keep talking.
Yeah, and I, even though they're not traditionally geared towards children, I think it is important to read a lot of them to your kids. I've been reading a lot of the Grimm's fairy tales to my 4-year-old son, and he really enjoys them. And the violence is off-putting for adults, but I think for kids, I mean, it's really almost cartoonish violence. It's nothing like grotesque, really. It's nothing like the Saw movies or something. Kids are, everything to them is, you know, crazy and scary. There's nothing normal for a young child because they're trying to figure out what normal is. And so when you read these fairy tales to them, they're not going to be traumatized. Now there are exceptions. Some kids are more sensitive, but most of the time they're going to handle it just fine as long as you don't make a big deal about it. And I've made it a habit not to try to explain what the fairy tales mean to them. First of all, because I don't really know. But second of all, I want to leave that a mystery for them because I think there's a lot of Christian themes in Grimm's fairy tales and in fairy tales in general. There's a lot. I think it's jam packed in there because these are like developed in a Christian culture. And so these are heavily Christian themes, but I don't want to point all those out to my children. I want them to realize that on their own. And I think it'll be more powerful for them if they do that. So, yeah. Closing thoughts. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great way to look at it. But at the same time, you could always link that into, hey, here's a story. What does that story remind you of?
Yeah, asking leading questions is good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how I'm trying to approach it. You know, what do you think? You know, what does this remind you of? You know, and it's not me just kind of turning it into a school lesson. It's them, me asking questions and them I mean, my 4-year-old isn't really there yet. He can't really do that yet, but he's kind of getting there. So yeah, that's a good point though. So that's it for me. Do you have any final thoughts, Katarinya?
At this point, no. But we are going to have to continue this conversation because I made a wonderful discovery from my childhood.
All right. What is that?
I'm not going to tell you. It's going to have to wait until next time.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, we have other things to discuss too. I do want to discuss other kinds of creatures.
Yes.
And if you ever wanted to come on and talk about any books or anything, any fiction or any movies, that'd be great too. So, yeah, we're definitely going to have Katarinya on again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of I Might Believe in Fairies. Please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Please follow me on Twitter at Aaron Erber and like me on Facebook. If you're excited to see where the podcast is going and want to offer some support for the project, you can find me on Patreon. Music is by Alexander Nakarada, and podcast art was designed by my wonderful sister-in-law, Linnea Kisby. Until next time, talk to you soon.